I always thought my life was stable. Waking up next to someone who was predictable down to the smallest details seemed like a sign of reliability, not routine. We lived peacefully, without sudden turns, without unexpected passions. It stayed that way until he appeared in our home. His name was Daniel. A distant relative of my husband, whom he hadn't seen in years. He arrived suddenly, with a light smile and a suitcase, as if this wasn't his first visit. I remember the moment I first opened the door and met his gaze, too confident, too deep. "I hope I won't be any trouble," he said then. I didn't know that these words would take on a completely different meaning in just a few weeks. At first, everything was neutral. Ordinary breakfast conversations, casual comments about the weather or the news. But gradually, I began to notice the details. How he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. How he deliberately lingered his hand on mine when passing a cup. How his voice took on a different tone when we were alone. It was something forbidden, yet so alive. I felt the boundary was near, but I couldn't stop. I'll take a short pause. Write in the comments where you're from and if you've ever experienced something similar in your life. It's interesting to see how many people can relate to this story. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Now, I continue. I knew I was playing with fire. Every look, every movement, everything was pulling me into an abyss from which there was no escape. I tried to avoid him, to keep my distance, but the more I resisted, the stronger the pull became. That evening, my partner left. He had no idea he was leaving me alone with someone whose presence had become dangerous temptation. Just me and him. I sat in the kitchen, trying to focus on something mundane. But even in another room, I could feel his gaze. Unconsciously, I held my breath whenever I heard him move, whenever his steps came closer. "Are you always this tense?" his voice sounded behind me. I flinched but didn't turn around. He stepped closer. Too close. As if testing how far he could go before I would pull away. "Daniel." "Don't," I whispered. But we both knew those words meant nothing. Everything happened too fast. There was no way to stop. It was too intense, too emotional, too forbidden. And when it was over, I realized I had crossed a line with no way back. Panic consumed me. With trembling hands, I tried to compose myself, to even out my breathing. But he was calm. Smiling, as if nothing had happened. "You knew this would happen," he said softly. I looked at him and understood, he didn't regret it. In fact, he was enjoying the moment. But the worst part was yet to come. A few days later, I felt someone watching me. Daniel's grandmother. She lived nearby, and everyone knew she noticed things she shouldn't. She knew. I saw it in her eyes. For 6 days, I lived in fear. I waited for Daniel's grandmother to speak, to tell everything. But she remained silent. Her behavior had changed. She stopped going outside, even though she always took walks at the same time. When I accidentally met her gaze, she smiled mysteriously, not in judgment, not in anger, but as if she knew something more than she could say. I couldn't breathe normally anymore. My nerves were stretched to the limit, but the worst part was the uncertainty. I had no idea what she was planning. Daniel, on the other hand, was completely unfazed. He continued living as if nothing had happened. Whenever I showed my anxiety, he just smirked. "You worry too much." How could he be so calm? Didn't he realize this could destroy everything? On the 7th day, his grandmother made her move. She gathered the whole family around a large table. At first, I didn't understand what was happening, but her voice was too firm, too steady for this to be a casual gathering. "I have a story I want to share," she began. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear her words. She spoke calmly, but there was an unspoken threat in her tone. Many years ago, our family had a similar story. A story about a woman who made a choice that changed her life forever. She thought no one would find out. She thought it would remain a secret. But secrets, the grandmother paused, looking straight at me, always find a way to come out. I couldn't breathe anymore. But what she said next was far worse than I could have imagined. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts about this story. Have you ever experienced something similar, or do you know someone who has? Your opinions are very important to me, and I read every single comment. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video so you won't miss new thrilling stories. Write in the comments, secrets always come to light, so I know you listened until the end. Wishing you a wonderful day.